Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and hearing that the US dollar has collapsed. What happens to your debt? Wouldn't paying off your debt be infinitely easier? Or wouldn't it completely vanish? Well, not exactly. But if you're wondering why someone would even think something like that could happen, I'll explain it in just a minute because it's important. But if the dollar completely collapsed, the uncertainty would be paralyzing. I mean, the fear of skyrocketing prices, financial turmoil, and the loss of your savings would echo through the country, feeding the chaotic public sentiment that the sky has officially fallen, only to make things even worse than they would be. If you don't know how this works, you could find yourself at a point of no return amid complete devastation as hyperinflation drives up costs beyond any chance of you ever being able to catch up. By the end of this video, you'll know what a currency collapse means, how it affects your debt, how you can prepare and protect yourself and your finances, and the answer to the biggest concern on everyone's mind: what's the likelihood of it actually happening here in the US? But first, if you follow us here, you know that inflation is a wealth creation tool for the wealthy and all those who know the secret to it. Without going too deep, I want to stay on topic here, but higher inflation typically benefits borrowers, making it easier and easier to pay off debt the higher inflation goes. So, if that's the case, if rapid inflation or even hyperinflation causes the dollar to collapse, wouldn't that essentially cause all debt to disappear? Sort of. And I'll explain, but let me bring you up to speed if you're here for the very first time. You see, inflation makes it easier to pay back your debts. And it works like this. If you have a big bag of cash and you go bury it in your backyard for 10 years, let's say you got 100 grand in there, and on that same day you buried it, you borrowed 100 grand from the bank. So what's going to happen? Well, the cash you buried will become less valuable over those 10 years because of inflation. Most people get that part. But what most don't get is that inflation is an equal opportunity money destroyer. So it devalues the money you borrowed too. In other words, your debt, in the exact same way. So it will be easier to pay that debt back because it's worth less. Get it? Here, I'm going to exaggerate this concept beyond 10 years to demonstrate. Let's say you walked into your bank today and borrowed $300,000 to buy the average median-priced home in America, and the bank gave you a 30-year fixed mortgage to pay it back. Then, the day after you closed escrow, you were the official owner of the property now, we then experience Venezuelan-style hyperinflation. And now your Starbucks latte is $400 a cup, your gas is $500 a gallon, your Chick-fil-A lunch is $1,500, and that median-priced home is now $40 million. The cost of everything has skyrocketed. But so has your income. I mean, it might not shoot up as fast as your expenses, but your income will go to the moon too. That's how inflation works. So if you are making $100,000 a year, you're now making $10 million a year. Now, think about that $300,000 mortgage you just got. It'd be really easy to manage that now, considering you're earning $10 million a year, right? You'd have your new home paid off by, I don't know, the end of the month. Like I said, that's an extreme example, so you could see more clearly how this works, but it's no different than how it's playing out right now in real life. You see, 20 years ago, the median price for a home was $212,000, and interest rates were 5.5%, making the average mortgage payment about $960. Today, that seems cheap, doesn't it? But the reality is that people then, they didn't think so. But it's cheap today because you're paying back 20-year-old debt with today's inflated dollars. So, logic might have people think that if the dollar completely collapsed today, yesterday's debt would, for all intents and purposes, be worth zero, right? Sort of. But the repercussions are far more complex. First thing, let's get clear about what a currency collapse is. It occurs when a country's currency loses its value rapidly due to hyperinflation, or loss of confidence, or economic instability, sometimes all of them together. You see, this scenario, it leads to skyrocketing prices, financial turmoil, and a severe impact on both savings and debt. Many factors can contribute to a dollar collapse. These include excessive money printing, soaring national debt, economic instability, and a loss of investor confidence. Historically, currency collapses have often occurred in countries with fixed exchange rates, where governments attempt to maintain a currency value that doesn't align with economic realities. When investors and citizens lose faith in the currency's value, they begin to sell it off, leading to rapid devaluation and financial chaos. Here, you may remember in high school reading about the fall of the Roman Empire, where they were experiencing a significant period of inflation that some might compare to what we today refer to as hyperinflation. But you don't need to go back to ancient Rome for an example of a currency collapsing. Between just 2004 and 2009, Zimbabwe's hyperinflation was driven by the government printing money to finance a war in the Congo and to compensate for agricultural land redistribution policies that reduced food production. At its peak, inflation was so severe that prices doubled every 24 hours. The situation was only stabilized when Zimbabwe abandoned its currency. They declared it collapsed and then adopted multiple foreign currencies, primarily the US dollar. Venezuela's hyperinflation began in 2013 and worsened due to extensive money printing to cover government spending amidst falling oil prices and economic mismanagement. By 2018, the inflation rate had soared to 65,000%. The government attempted to introduce a new cryptocurrency, the petro, to counteract the collapse, but to no avail, and inflation and economic hardship continue to plague the country today. Very recently, in just 2019, Argentina experienced inflation rates of over 50%, driven by a combination of high public debt, monetary policy missteps, and loss of confidence in the currency. The government has struggled to stabilize the economy, and inflation remains a persistent issue. Well, just 2 days prior to me recording this, Argentina recorded its very first week without inflation in 30 years. This just 6 months after Javier Milei's inauguration. Hopefully, he continues his good work there and gets the Argentina economy back in check. But if any of these causes sound familiar, they should. You see, despite its current strength, the US dollar is not immune to the same vulnerabilities that have affected all of these other countries' currencies. The US is and has been printing money at a blistering pace to finance wars, to cover government spending, monetary policy missteps, and a growing public sentiment that's losing confidence in the dollar. All the same things that happened in those other countries prior to their currencies collapsing. The US has a high debt to GDP ratio, and while the economy is still growing, any significant downturn could tip the scales. Additionally, political instability and global economic shifts could trigger an even greater loss of confidence in the dollar. Most everything is currently working against the dollar, except one: the demand for the dollar. You see, when a country's currency is in demand, the currency stays strong. And one of the ways a currency remains in demand is if the country exports products that other countries want to buy and demands payment in its own currency. While the US does not export more than it imports, it has found another way to create an artificially high global demand for US dollars. You see, the US dollar is what is known as a reserve currency. Reserve currencies are used by nations across the world to purchase desired commodities, such as oil and gold. When sellers of these commodities demand payment in the reserve currency, an artificial demand for that currency is created, keeping it stronger than it might otherwise be. The biggest thing that could bring the dollar down is if it were to lose its position as the reserve currency. And recent events suggest many countries are conspiring to make that very thing happen. Just last week, a steady stream of fear-mongering fake news made its way through mainstream media, claiming a 50-year agreement forcing Saudi Arabia to sell oil in dollars had ended. Conspiracy or not, the news jolted people right out of their slumbers. But first, there was never a formal 50-year agreement forcing Saudi Arabia to sell oil exclusively in dollars. The Saudis have always sold oil in multiple currencies. Second, the dollar's role in global transactions is actually increasing, not declining, with a rise in usage from 18% to nearly 33% over just the past few years. And third, while the dollar's use as a store of value is declining, massive global debt denominated in dollars ensures continued demand. But with all that being true, it's certainly possible for the dollar to lose its reserve currency status, which would almost certainly trigger its collapse. So if the worst case scenario were to happen and the dollar did collapse, what would happen to your debt? The idea that inflation benefits borrowers by making it easier to pay off debt with devalued currency is partially true, but it's overly simplistic. You see, while inflation can reduce the value of debt, it also has several detrimental effects that can negate this benefit. For example, in Zimbabwe, inflation reached such extreme levels that prices doubled every 24 hours. Although this drastically reduced the real value of debt, it also led to severe shortage of basic goods, unemployment, and economic collapse. Many people lost their job, making it impossible to benefit from the devalued debt because they had no income to pay it off anyway, regardless of how cheap it was. Another example is Venezuela's hyperinflation. They saw inflation soar to 65,000% within a 5-year period. So theoretically, this should have made debt repayment easier, infinitely easier. But in reality, the population faced massive unemployment, a healthcare crisis, and food shortages. Who cares about debt when you can't eat? The economic instability rendered the supposed benefit of reduced debt moot because people were struggling just to meet their basic needs. Inflation does erode the value of debt, that is true, but this assumes that wages and salaries rise in tandem with inflation, allowing borrowers to maintain their standard of living and debt repayment capacity. However, during periods of hyperinflation, wage increases often lag behind price increases, reducing purchasing power and making it harder to keep up with living costs. Therefore, debt management is made harder, not easier. Investments and savings would also be hit hard, with traditional savings losing value and the stock markets becoming very volatile. In today's world, credit reporting adds another layer of complexity. Defaulting on loans can affect your credit score for years, making it difficult to borrow money even after the economy recovers. So maintaining good credit is crucial even during economic hardships. You see, the US dollar price isn't just some nebulous concept that only concerns economists. It actually has a big effect on your everyday life. Anytime the dollar price weakens or strengthens, your paycheck, the price of food and gasoline, interest rates on loans and investments, they're all affected. Now, most economic experts cite a negligible chance of the dollar collapsing in our lifetime. But if it does, how do you protect yourself? What should you own so that you don't end up with a bunch of useless pieces of paper? Well, I came up with a list of 10 things for you to consider owning. Number 1, gold, silver, and other precious metals. Precious metals like gold and silver have been used as currency and stores of value for centuries. In times of economic or political turmoil, they are often seen as safe haven assets. This idea, though, it's being challenged more and more as symptoms of market manipulation intermittently show themselves. 2, foreign currency. And 4 of the top ones would be the Japanese yen. It remains a strong currency, largely due to Japan's stable economic policies and significant trade surplus. Then there's the euro. It continues to be a reliable currency for diversification. The Eurozone has shown resilience through various crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic and recent geopolitical tensions. And then the Swiss franc remains one of the world's strongest currencies. It's backed by Switzerland's robust economy, their political neutrality, and strong financial sector. And then number 4, the Chinese yuan. That's been gaining prominence on the global stage. China's efforts to internationalize its currency, coupled with its significant economic growth and strategic initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, that's all boosted the yuan's credibility and use in international trade. All right, number 3, foreign stocks. Investing in foreign stocks could be a very wise move. After all, if the value of the dollar plummets, then the value of foreign stocks, they're likely to go up since they will be priced in stronger currencies. Number 4, foreign bonds. See, when it comes to protecting your portfolio from a potential dollar collapse, foreign bonds can offer stability and diversification as well as the potential for higher returns. Number 5, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. You see, while gold, land, and various commodities propose a physical form of investment, you can diversify your assets by investing in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, a virtual form. Mainstream adoption for these, it's growing by the day despite crypto's massive volatility. But some of the smartest people in the world are predicting cryptocurrencies to be the future of currency. So it makes sense to own some. Now, if you're ready for the rest of this list, let me know by clicking the like button. And if you'd like to stay up to date on the multitude of ways of making money in real estate, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. That's what I do here each and every week, among other things. But today, it's an example of something a little bit different. Now, number 6, collectibles. Collectibles can hold their intrinsic value even when the local currency loses its own value. You see, gold and silver coins, jewelry, artwork, classic cars, and firearms are recognized to be solid collectible hedges against a collapsed dollar. Now, number 7, income-producing real estate. It's one of the bigger go-to options that can shield you against the devaluation of the US dollar. And here's why. It's physical, it has utility, and people need it. It will never be worth zero. If the dollar's value completely collapses, people will still need shelter, they'll still need a roof over their head, and they will pay you for using yours with whatever currency takes the dollar's place. 8, land and agricultural commodities. You see, when the dollar collapses, land and agricultural commodities will be some of your best investments. Very much like real estate. People need these things. Number 9, off-the-grid living solutions. A major economic collapse might require more than just investing in precious metals and foreign currencies. There is a good chance you will need to live off the grid, away from your country's control and infrastructures, like growing your own food, sourcing water, and alternative energy like solar-powered appliances and tools. And if it comes to that, you will want to own number 10, barter items. You see, when the dollar collapses, barter items will become increasingly important. You know, a friend of mine, an admitted and proud doomsdayer, is stockpiling bourbon and bullets. He thinks they'll be as good as money if the country's dollar collapses. Anything that would fulfill basic human needs would be great to store too, like matches, fishing line, hooks, first aid materials, blankets, and perhaps a good stockpile of MREs, meals ready to eat. This is what they fed us in the Marine Corps when we were in the field, and they will store for 3 to 5 years, even longer if you can maintain storage at 75 degrees or less. There's a lot to consider. Some of these suggestions represent more dire conditions than others, but first and foremost, don't lose sight that diversification is key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Allocate a portion of your portfolio in a variety of assets that will hold their value should the dollar collapse. Another important thing to remember is that timing is everything. If you wait until after the dollar has already collapsed, it will be too late to invest or accumulate these things. You need to get ahead of the curve and start investing now. The sooner you do, the better your position will be when or if the bottom falls out from under the dollar. Now, with all that said, don't panic. It's easy to let fear take over when thinking about such a potentially catastrophic event as a currency collapse. And as I mentioned, most economic experts see a dollar collapse as highly unlikely in our lifetimes, but it is possible. If nothing else, income-producing real estate will put you in a good position should all hell break loose. So if you'd like some help, I've got some free information to help you get started. Go to cashflowsavvy.com, grab the free investor packet there, and if it makes sense, pick a time to hop on the phone to discuss the best next move for you. By understanding what happens when a currency collapses and taking informed, proactive steps, you can protect yourself from potential economic upheavals. Knowledge is power, and being informed, that's your best defense in uncertain times. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Oh, and in the meantime, I picked this video out special for you to watch here next. All right, take care.